Welcome to Deep Universus. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more in-depth analysis and breaking news from the world of business, technology, and geopolitics. In April 2025, China made headlines by ordering its airlines to suspend all new aircraft deliveries from Boeing. This wasn't just a routine policy change, it was a dramatic escalation that reverberated through boardrooms and trading floors worldwide, sending shockwaves through global business and aviation sectors alike. This was no minor dispute. It was a bold, calculated move in the intensifying economic confrontation between the United States and China. The world's two largest economies were now openly clashing, and the aviation industry was caught in the crossfire. The directive didn't just halt the delivery of finished planes, it also froze the flow of critical U.S. aircraft parts to China, effectively shutting down a multi-billion-dollar trade channel that had been a lifeline for both sides. Factories, suppliers, and logistics networks all felt the sudden chill. Boeing's shares plunged almost instantly, compounding what had already been a difficult year for the aerospace giant. Investors panicked, and the company's already fragile relationship with China, one of its most important markets, was thrown into jeopardy. Years of painstaking work to rebuild trust after the devastating 737 MAX crashes were suddenly at risk. The company's efforts to restore its reputation and regain market share faced a new, unexpected setback. Deliveries to China had only just resumed after years of uncertainty, and now, all that progress was erased overnight. Planes ready for handover sat idle and airline plans were thrown into chaos. The move was a stark reminder of how quickly geopolitics can upend even the biggest players in global commerce. International supply chains, trade agreements, and business strategies all can be disrupted in an instant by political decisions. Boeing, America's top exporter and a symbol of U.S. industrial might, was left exposed to forces far beyond its control. The world watched as a single decision in Beijing sent ripples across continents, reminding us all of the fragile balance in global trade. China's Boeing ban was a direct response to a rapidly escalating trade war, a conflict that had been brewing for months as tensions between the world's two largest economies reached a boiling point. The move was not just about airplanes, it was a calculated signal that China was willing to hit back where it hurt most. The U.S. had imposed tariffs up to 145% on Chinese goods, a sweeping measure that affected everything from electronics to textiles. In retaliation, China responded with a 125% tariff on American products, including, crucially, aircraft. These tit-for-tat tariffs sent shockwaves through global supply chains, raising costs for businesses and consumers alike. By targeting Boeing, China struck at a symbol of U.S. manufacturing strength and technological prowess. Boeing isn't just an airplane maker, it's an icon of American industry, employing tens of thousands and supporting a vast network of suppliers across the country. The suspension of deliveries turned what could have been mere financial penalties into a full commercial blockade. Planes that were ready for delivery sat idle, and contracts worth billions were suddenly in limbo, creating uncertainty for airlines and manufacturers alike. For Chinese airlines, the tariffs made new Boeing jets unaffordable, forcing a halt in purchases and disrupting fleet expansion plans. Airlines faced tough choices: delay growth, seek alternative suppliers, or absorb higher costs. The trade war's reach extended far beyond aviation. U.S. tariffs on foreign cars threatened to slash North American sales by nearly 2 million units, putting pressure on automakers, dealerships, and workers throughout the industry. The ripple effects were felt in every corner of the global economy. The targeting of Boeing was part of a broader, aggressive strategy on both sides, as each country sought to gain leverage in high-stakes negotiations. Every new tariff, every countermeasure, was a move in a complex game of economic chess. What began as a series of skirmishes had become a full-blown economic war, threatening billions in global trade and undermining confidence in international markets. The world watched anxiously as the stakes continued to rise. The aviation sector, with its long planning cycles and massive investments, was now at the center of the storm, caught between two superpowers and facing an uncertain future as the tariff tussle raged on. China's ban hit Boeing during one of its most turbulent periods. The company was still reeling from a 2024 incident where a 737 MAX 9 door panel blew out mid-flight, reigniting safety concerns and tanking its stock. Production slowdowns, labor strikes, and regulatory scrutiny had already strained Boeing's operations. The looming trade war threatened critical parts supply, compounding internal chaos. Boeing was caught between US policy and Chinese retaliation, facing mounting financial and reputational damage. The ban was just the latest blow in a crisis that questioned Boeing's future. The Beijing directive put 29 scheduled Boeing deliveries to China in 2025 on hold, instantly slashing revenue. 10 jets, ready for handover, were stranded on the tarmac. The suspension jeopardized a backlog of 179 planes ordered by China's top airlines, worth tens of billions. Boeing now faced a costly inventory of undeliverable jets, with capital tied up and storage costs mounting. The disruption threw production schedules into chaos, forcing Boeing to choose between bloating inventory or cutting output. Either option risked further financial pain and ripple effects across its supply chain. The company's careful planning was upended overnight. The fallout from China's decision rippled through the entire U.S. industrial base. Boeing's vast supply chain, including firms like Spirit AeroSystems and Howmet Aerospace, faced sudden uncertainty and financial risk. Suppliers were caught between Boeing and the new tariffs, sparking tense negotiations over who would absorb the costs. The disruption even hit Airbus, as shared suppliers struggled to keep up, delaying aircraft production worldwide. Airlines globally, including Ryanair, braced for delivery delays, showing how interconnected the industry had become. The trade war threatened jobs and confidence across the aviation sector, with $650 billion in US-China trade at stake. With Boeing sidelined, Airbus looked poised to benefit in China. China, Airbus's largest market, offered a major opening, but Airbus was already stretched by its own backlog and couldn't absorb all redirected orders. This gave China's homegrown manufacturer, COMAC, a chance to accelerate its C919 jet program. The trade dispute fueled Beijing's push for self-reliance in aviation, but COMAC still relied heavily on US and Western suppliers for key components. If China cut off US parts, the C919 program would stall. Beijing faced a dilemma: punish Boeing and promote COMAC, but risk crippling its own aviation ambitions. The situation exposed the limits of decoupling in a deeply interconnected industry. China's long-term goal remained clear: break the Western duopoly, but not at the cost of its own progress. With China's doors firmly shut, Boeing found itself in a race against time, scrambling to find new buyers for hundreds of stranded jets that were originally destined for Chinese airlines. The sudden loss of its largest overseas market sent shockwaves through the company, leaving entire fleets parked and gathering dust on tarmacs around the world. India, with its rapidly expanding aviation sector and a growing middle class eager to fly, quickly emerged as a promising alternative. Airlines in India were placing record orders, and Boeing saw a glimmer of hope. But the process of reconfiguring planes, changing seating layouts, updating avionics, and meeting new regulatory standards proved both costly and time-consuming. Each jet required months of work before it could take to the skies under a new flag. Redirecting these aircraft was more of a stopgap measure than a true solution. It helped Boeing limit its losses, but it couldn't come close to replacing the steady, reliable demand that China had provided for years. The company was forced to rethink its global strategy and brace for a long period of uncertainty. Meanwhile, in China, the government weighed its options. Officials considered offering financial aid to domestic airlines, hoping to cushion the blow of higher costs brought on by tariffs and trade tensions. This move signaled that Beijing wanted to avoid crippling its own carriers, even as it played hardball with the US. Financial analysts around the world warned that China's tough stance, while a powerful bargaining chip, was risky and likely unsustainable in the long run. The global aviation industry was watching closely, aware that prolonged standoffs could ripple through supply chains and economies. Boeing's central role in the US economy gave it significant political leverage. The company's troubles quickly became a national concern, increasing pressure on Washington to step in and negotiate a resolution that would protect American jobs and industry. As tensions mounted, it became clear that the standoff would eventually force both sides back to the negotiating table, whether they liked it or not. The stakes were simply too high for either country to ignore. The only question that remained was how much damage would be done to Boeing, its workers, and the global aviation industry before a deal could finally be reached. The 2025 US-China trade dispute, with Boeing at its center, marks a new era of volatility in global commerce. The crisis exposed the risks of deep economic interdependence and forced a rethink of American industrial strategy. Calls for de-risking from China grew louder, with industries urged to diversify and reshore supply chains. The aviation sector now faces the prospect of splitting into rival blocs, one led by Boeing and Airbus, the other by China's Comac. If China achieves self-sufficiency, global airlines could face new technical and political barriers. The Boeing standoff is more than a business dispute. It's a symbol of the contest for economic supremacy in the 21st century. The outcome will shape the future of international trade and the balance between national interests and global integration.